The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. In today's true crime story, we will explore one of the most shocking marriage betrayal stories, where a wife betrayed husband in a way no one could have ever imagined. In June 2014, it all began on a typical summer afternoon, when Ryan Carter's drone broke down and fell into the Wilsons' backyard. He was outdoors operating it. He had no idea that getting it back would alter his life in such a profound way. Unaware of Ryan's presence, Martha Wilson was nude beside the pool. Instead of being appalled, Ryan was enthralled when he saw her uncovered as he crept into the yard to get the drone. What transpired after Martha noticed him staring turned into a fatal affair that destroyed lives. For more than 30 years, 65-year-old housewife Martha Wilson and her husband, 68-year-old retired police officer Henry Wilson, had resided in the same suburban residence. Over the years, their once passionate and loving marriage had become routine, with Martha feeling more and more alone and Henry spending more time with old friends. Martha frequently attracted attention from people around her because she kept her young appearance and level of fitness despite her advanced age. Ryan Carter, a regular high school graduate who was unsure of his future, lived 2 doors down the street with his parents. He had no idea that a fortuitous meeting in the Wilsons' backyard would result in a perilous liaison that would ruin their life. The simple act of recovering Ryan's drone after it crashed into Martha Wilson's garden on June 3, 2014, became a moment that altered everything. Ryan crept into the Wilsons' yard, being cautious not to wake anyone. The strong sunshine bounced off the pool water on this sunny afternoon. When he got closer, he saw Martha sunbathing by the pool, naked. Her body was impressively toned for her age of 65. Ryan couldn't stop staring at her, and the years had been kind to her. He paused, taking it all in, his heart pounding from something fresh, something other than fear of being found. He looked at Martha, who showed no signs of panic or shame. Rather than responding as Ryan had anticipated, she grinned. She seemed to be able to read his mind, as evidenced by the knowing smile. In that instant, there was a spark, an unsaid tension. Stunned, Ryan snatched up his drone and hurried off, but the thought of Martha stayed with him long after he got home. Their contacts got more deliberate over the course of the following few days. Every time Ryan passed the Wilson residence, Martha was outside, either relaxing on her porch or watering her plants. She would wave at him, occasionally maintaining eye contact with him for a bit longer than was suitable. Ryan sensed the draw, the implicit invitation to something more, even if it was initially faint and seemingly innocent. By the middle of June, Martha asked Ryan to come inside. Ryan was walking home from the supermarket one afternoon when it happened. He was asked in for tea by Martha, who was sitting on her porch as he passed. Small banter about the neighborhood and his post-graduation plans kicked off the conversation. Martha was more endearing than Ryan had anticipated. He knew other older women, but she was different. She exuded charm and confidence. As they conversed, Martha gradually started to turn the conversation in the direction of more intimate subjects, such as her feelings about her life, her marriage, and her need for something novel and thrilling. Not only was she attractive, but there was a mystery about her that drew Ryan into her world. In contrast to the previous ladies in his life, she seemed so untouchable yet approachable. Their meetings increased in frequency as the days went by. By June 25th, Ryan was going to see her virtually every day. Henry, Martha's husband, was often out running errands or playing golf with his old buddies, so she never spoke much about him. When Ryan was there, the house always felt like their own zone, a place that was exclusively hers. The affair had fully blossomed on July 1, 2014. Ryan and Martha had established a pattern. Ryan would sneak over to her house every afternoon when Henry wasn't there. They met in privacy, away from prying eyes. They would hang out for hours on end, and Ryan's feelings grew stronger as they grew closer. Despite their different ages, he was certain that they were intended to be together and that what they had was genuine. Martha, however, did not feel as attached, even if she enjoyed the attention. Ryan was just a way for her to escape the monotony of her existence. It was thrilling to have someone young and ready to please, but she didn't think it would last. Nevertheless, she supported him, relishing her authority over him. Conversely, Ryan became increasingly compulsive. He would express his love for her and his desire to remain with her forever. Ryan would become agitated, and his envy would appear whenever Martha discussed Henry or her life outside of their sessions. Martha didn't push him away despite noticing his increasing attachment. She relished the excitement of it all, Ryan's loyalty, the privacy, and the sense of being wanted once more. For her, it was all part of the game. She never told Ryan that she didn't want things to continue any farther. She knew that it was only a momentary diversion for her, so she allowed him to think anything he wanted to believe. The romance had intensified by mid-July. When they were apart, Ryan, who was now enamored with Martha, would daydream about her and speculate about their potential future together to pass the time. If only Henry were not involved, he began to think that perhaps they could be together. His feelings were not taken seriously by Martha, who made fun of his recommendations and subtly reminded him that they were running out of time. But Ryan was unable to let go. The more often he visited, the riskier the affair became. Martha was too engrossed in the excitement to stop them, even though she knew they were playing with fire. Because of his infatuation, Ryan was oblivious to the fact that Martha wasn't as invested as he was. Both of them were unaware of how lethal it would turn out to be, but what had begun as a basic attraction had turned into something far more sinister. Ryan had become dangerously obsessed by August 10, 2014. What had been an exciting secret had become something far more sinister. He could no longer bear the idea of Martha being with anybody else, particularly Henry, because his feelings for her had grown so strong. Ryan started talking about his frustrations as they spent more time together. He would remark about how much he loved her and how, as long as Henry was there, they would never be able to be together. As his jealousy of Henry grew, Ryan began to pressure Martha into divorcing her husband. Martha initially dismissed his remarks. She never thought it would get that far. Ryan was still only a toy to her, someone to keep her busy and give her a sense of purpose. Henry had given her a secure, comfortable existence, and she had never given leaving him much thought. However, as Ryan continued to bring it up, his remarks started to make sense. He persisted in persuading her that things could be so much better without Henry. Ryan eventually instilled in Martha the notion that Henry should be killed. He claimed that the simplest and least messy solution that wouldn't raise suspicion was to poison Henry. After being appalled by the idea at first, Martha began to consider it more and more. She began to consider whether it would be possible because Ryan had made it seem so easy. By September 5, 2014, their cautious facade was beginning to fall apart due to the weight of the scandal. Henry accidentally picked up Martha's phone that night. What he saw on the TV was anything but ordinary, even if it was an everyday time. Ryan's message showed up, and it wasn't a gentle one. It described how they intended to poison him, which Henry could not have predicted. The remarks pierced him not only because they threatened his life, but also because they were a profound betrayal. His long-term partner, Martha, was conspiring against him with a boy who may have been their son. Even though he was shocked and upset, Henry was unable to bring himself to injure Martha at that very time. He still loved her in spite of everything. Rather, he chose to face her head-on. When he and Martha were alone in the house later that night, Henry walked up to her with composure. He didn't scream or shout. Rather, he placed her phone on the table and requested an explanation. His visage showed the sorrow, yet his speech remained firm. Martha was taken by surprise. She had not anticipated Henry's method of discovery, and the knowledge that her secret had been discovered left her frantically trying to maintain control. Martha became defensive while Henry waited for a response. She attempted to sidestep the issue since she realized there was no way to talk herself out of it. In the hopes that the neighbors would hear her scream and believe Henry was harming her, she started to do so. It was a frantic attempt to confuse things and paint herself as the victim. Henry attempted to soothe her amidst the confusion. He reached out, but Martha staggered in her fright. She stumbled as she attempted to retreat from the small, furniture-filled living room. A serious cut was instantly caused when her head struck the coffee table's sharp edge. The beige carpet underneath her became stained as blood started to seep from the wound. Everything froze for a sec. Martha lay on the floor, the pool of blood getting bigger by the moment, while Henry stood there, stunned. He was immobile. Despite his racing thoughts, he was unable to summon assistance. He observed with amazement as Martha's life gradually faded away. He did nothing while the lady he had loved and who had deceived him was dying in front of him. There was a significant loss of blood, and Martha vanished in a matter of minutes. Unable to comprehend what had just transpired, Henry stayed in the living room for what seemed like hours. With the exception of the gentle ticking of the clock, the room was strangely quiet. He was unable to summon an ambulance or the police. Still in disbelief, he sat and stared at Martha's dead body. The altercation had gone horribly wrong very fast. The situation's reality didn't start to set in until later that evening. However, it was too late to make any changes by that point. Henry was aware that what had just happened would have repercussions, and Martha was dead. Despite its flaws, the life they had created together was now over, shattered by jealousy, betrayal, and a panic attack that no one could reverse. When Ryan didn't hear from Martha on the morning of September 6, 2014, his worries about her started to intensify. On weekends, when Henry was typically away, she would usually reply to his texts immediately. However, his phone was silent that day. He attempted to send multiple messages while continuously monitoring for a response, but none was received. Ryan began to feel anxious, and by the afternoon, he was unable to get rid of the uneasy sensation he had. Ignoring him was not typical of Martha, especially in light of everything they had planned. Ryan's anxiety peaked in the evening. He felt a sense of dread descend upon him, and he could no longer bear to wait. He was afraid of the worst. He made the decision to act and dialed the police in the hopes that they would come and see how Martha was doing. He only stated that he hadn't heard from her and was concerned, without bringing up the affair. Later that night, the Wilson residence was the scene of a scene when the police came. As he had been since the previous evening, Henry remained seated in the living room. He appeared totally cut off from the outside world, and his face was expressionless. A few feet from him on the floor was Martha's motionless body, a pool of dried blood beneath her head. The issue was swiftly taken over by the cops. Henry gave them a rather robotic response when they asked him what had happened. He insisted repeatedly that he hadn't intended for things to turn out that way and that it had been an accident. The police began a thorough investigation into Martha's death on September 7, 2014. Despite his insistence that Martha's death was accidental, Henry was arrested. But when they investigated more, the investigators found information that made the case more complex. The investigators were drawn to a string of messages on Martha's phone, which had been resting on a nearby table. Her affair with Ryan and a terrifying discussion about poisoning Henry were both exposed in those communications. Compared to Henry's account of a straightforward accident, the murderous plot, which was detailed in such detail over text, presented a very darker image. It was almost immediately apparent that Ryan was involved. He and Martha exchanged damaging texts. The time frame, Ryan's developing obsession, his jealousy of Henry, and the risky scheme to kill the man separating him from Martha were all witnessed by investigators. Although Ryan made an effort to disassociate himself from the actual murder, the evidence was too strong and he was taken in for interrogation. He could not deny his involvement in the scheme to poison Henry, and it was obvious that he had been pressuring Martha toward a risky option. Additional information regarding the nature of the affair surfaced as the investigation went on. Over the course of the summer, neighbors started discussing the exchanges they had observed between Martha and Ryan. Others had heard rumors of an inappropriate relationship, while others had saw them together at strange hours of the day. It became increasingly evident that this was more than a tragic accident as the police discovered more. It was a perverse tale of murder, obsession, and treachery. The majority of the case has been put together by detectives by September 20, 2014. They came to the conclusion that even though Henry might not have meant to murder Martha that evening, his actions had nevertheless caused her death. Martha had died as a result of the fight in the living room, her fall, and her reluctance to call for assistance. Henry was consequently accused of involuntary manslaughter. Although he had no intention of killing her, the altercation had gotten out of hand, and his failure to intervene during those crucial seconds guaranteed her demise. Ryan, meanwhile, was charged with far more serious offenses. His involvement in Henry's attempted murder was evident from the messages he exchanged with Martha. There was no space for doubt because of his persistent pressure on Martha to leave Henry and the evil plan to poison him. Ryan's role in the scheme to kill Henry led to his being charged with attempted murder. By late September, the story was making headlines around the state when the media swiftly took notice. The situation was exacerbated by the startling age difference between Martha and Ryan. The fact that a 65-year-old housewife had a risky relationship with a 19-year-old boy next door was shocking to many. Every component of a media sensation was present in this situation: murder, adultery, and a lethal scheme to kill an unwary husband. The neighborhood was shocked as word got out. How things had gone so wrong was incomprehensible to many who had known the Wilsons for years. Henry, a former officer, had been popular in the town, and Martha had always been seen as a respectable woman. Now that the reality was out, however, the seemingly normal couple was depicted in a far more negative light. Henry and Ryan were the focus of attention by the time the case went to trial. Ryan's role in the murderous scheme was exposed for the court to see, while Henry's defense centered on the fact that he had never planned to kill Martha. Although their punishments reflected the distinctions in their responsibilities, both men would ultimately be held accountable for their conduct. His defense painted Henry as a man driven to the brink by treachery, even though he did nothing to stop Martha's deadly fall. His legal team concentrated on how he had learned of his wife's extramarital affair, the unsettling text messages that were being used to plot his murder, and the surprise of facing Martha that evening. But the prosecution emphasized that he did not call for assistance while Martha was bleeding. Despite admitting that the death was accidental, they maintained that Henry's carelessness was a contributing factor in her demise. Henry was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter on October 15, 2014, and given an 8-month jail sentence. Although the judge considered his assistance with the investigation and his lack of malicious intent, he was unable to overlook the fact that Henry had allowed Martha to die without taking any action to save her life. The little sentence was still devastating to Henry. He had lost his freedom, however temporarily, along with his wife and his reputation. For Ryan, however, the consequences were far more dire. The court didn't feel sorry for him. He undoubtedly played a part in Henry's attempted murder, and the prosecution portrayed him as a dangerous young man motivated by obsession and envy. Ryan had undoubtedly been a willing participant in the conspiracy, as evidenced by the mails he and Martha exchanged outlining their scheme to poison Henry. He had gone down a destructive path because of his obsession with Martha, even though she only used him as a thrill. Ryan was given a 7-year prison sentence for attempted murder on November 10, 2014. The court stressed the gravity of his acts while acknowledging his advanced age. In addition to having an extramarital affair, the judge noted that Ryan had actively pushed Martha to murder her husband. He would now have to pay the price because his infatuation had made him oblivious to the situation's reality. Throughout the trial, the media kept up their coverage of the case, highlighting the murderous plot, the tragic finish that left Martha dead on the floor of her living room, the scandalous facts, and the affair between an elderly woman and a youngster. As the tale gained traction, the area where Martha and Henry had previously resided came to represent how even the most peaceful neighborhoods may conceal sinister secrets. Henry and Ryan were both in jail by December 1, 2014, and the case that had previously captured the media's interest started to lose public interest. The tragedy's aftermath caused deep wounds. Henry would never entirely recover from the loss of his wife and the harm to his reputation, even though his term was brief. Unable to deal with the memory of what had transpired, he left the area after being released from prison. Ryan's life was also forever altered. He was forced to face the truth of what he had done after his young fixation with Martha had taken him in an unexpected direction. He would have plenty of time to think about his decisions during his 7 years in prison, but his life would be completely different by the time he was freed. This instance demonstrates how easily a harmless fascination can turn into a fatal obsession. While Martha's attempt to exploit him as a fleeting delight cost her everything, Ryan's obsession with Martha took him in a direction he never would have thought possible. What occurs if a boy shows excessive admiration for an older woman? For more, see Another Deadly Affair, in which the husband learns of his wife's covert liaison with a neighbor's teenage son, which culminates in murder. Remember to subscribe and like so you don't miss our daily updates.